The moment I walked into the conference room, every head turned, but not for the usual reasons. At the end of the long glass table sat my husband, adjusting his tie with an unease he couldn't mask. Beside him, she sat with her arms crossed, trying to look composed in her cream silk blouse, too young, too confident, too obvious. I didn't greet them. I didn't need to. I simply handed the HR director 2 envelopes, each thick, embossed, and final. "These are their termination papers," I said evenly. "Effective immediately." My husband stood up, face flushed. "Excuse me. Who do you think you are barging in here like this?" I looked him squarely in the eye. "I think I'm the owner." Silence fell so heavy, you could hear the tap of my heels as I walked to the head of the table, the seat he always thought belonged to him. He opened his mouth to object, but I cut him off. "Don't bother asking how this happened. Just know, it didn't happen overnight. While you were building secrets, I was building something else." From the stunned expressions around the room to the dawning horror in his eyes, I knew the message had landed. The woman he underestimated had just appended everything. It began with a dry cleaning receipt. I wasn't snooping, I was looking for my charger in his overnight bag, when a folded piece of paper slipped out. A 2-night stay at the Aria in Macau, marked, business retreat. I stared at the dates. I remembered that weekend well. I'd stayed home nursing a fever, and he hadn't picked up my calls. Said he was swamped. I didn't cry. Not then. I told myself there must be a reason. But deep down, I already knew. Still, I didn't confront him. I wanted more than a hunch. And I got it. A week later, I dropped off lunch at his office. The receptionist hesitated when I asked for him. "He's in a meeting," she said, eyes flicking toward the conference room. The glass wasn't fully frosted. I saw them. Sitting close. Smiling. Her fingers briefly touched his wrist. He didn't flinch. That night, he kissed me on the forehead as I lay in bed pretending to sleep. The final crack came one quiet Sunday afternoon. I was folding laundry in the next room, when I heard his voice on speakerphone, low, soft, tender in a way it hadn't been with me in years. "You're different," he said. "She doesn't get me like you do." The next sound was my heartbeat in my ears. I stared at the still warm laundry in my lap and thought, he's finally told the truth. Just not to me. I sat in that silence, surrounded by his betrayal and the echo of everything I'd given up, my career, my time, my trust. But even then, I didn't cry. Because a voice inside me, cool and clear, whispered, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." He thought I was just a housewife now. The woman who picked up dry cleaning, signed school forms, remembered anniversaries even when he forgot. He'd rewritten me in his mind as background noise, a permanent fixture in his life that required no attention, no respect. But before I became his wife, I had a name in my own right. 15 years ago, I was the youngest female director in my division at a supply chain tech firm. I negotiated contracts worth millions, mentored junior staff, and made quarterly forecasts with terrifying accuracy. I didn't leave that job because I lacked ambition, I left because we agreed one of us should be home for the kids. And between us, I believed he had the more promising career I sacrificed for his dreams. And now he was feeding me lies while feeding her oysters. What he never bothered to ask was, what I'd done with my severance. Or how I'd invested the small inheritance from my father. While he bought tailored suits and watched YouTube clips on executive presence, I built a modest but powerful portfolio, quiet, diverse, reliable. I also maintained something more dangerous than wealth, relationships. The old CTO still took my calls. A few founders owed me favors. A handful of former mentees now sat on boards and in venture capital firms. My LinkedIn was dormant. My skills were not. I wasn't just angry. I was ready. Because unlike him, I didn't need to lie to feel powerful, I just needed a plan. And now, I had one. Once I made the decision, everything sharpened. My grief became strategy. My silence became leverage. The first thing I did was get the full picture: his workplace, its structure, financial health, and competitors. I didn't ask him questions. I asked around. A quick coffee with a former colleague confirmed what I suspected: his company was in the middle of a strategic pivot, bleeding mid-level talent, and privately courting acquisition talks with larger players. That was my opening. I set up a shell corporation under an untraceable name, and quietly approached one of the rival firms, one I had once helped through a difficult logistics crisis years back. Their CEO still remembered me. I offered capital, operational support, a strategic vision, but most importantly, I offered discretion. They accepted. Within 3 weeks, my shell company became the primary investor in the acquisition. I orchestrated meetings through lawyers and intermediaries. My name was never in the room, but my fingerprints were all over the deal. I read every clause. I rewrote performance metrics. I inserted provisions that would give me control of restructuring once the merger was finalized. He was too busy playing mentor to his intern to notice the walls shifting around him. During this time, he would come home humming, confident. He even joked about getting a promotion after their Bali trip. "It's all lining up," he said one night, sipping wine while scrolling through flight options. "They're finally seeing my value." I smiled. "I'm sure they are." By the time they boarded the plane, I'd already signed the merger papers. By the time they landed, I'd become the controlling partner. By the time they returned to work, their desks were being reassigned. Once the ink on the acquisition dried, I didn't rush into retaliation. That would have been too easy. And too small. Instead, I began designing their fall, professionally, legally, and politically. First, I scheduled meetings with the HR and compliance departments. Quietly, I implemented a new code of conduct across the newly merged company. All existing employees, including my husband and his little protege, had to re-sign their employment agreements under updated moral clauses. No romantic relationships within direct reporting lines. No unauthorized travel reimbursement. Full expense transparency. Of course, I made sure no one read the fine print, except legal. I needed everything airtight. Next, I had IT audit their email history. Nothing aggressive, just a few routine system sweeps. I already knew there'd be dirt. Sure enough, I found receipts for upgraded hotel rooms, a series of suspicious invoice approvals, and enough borderline sexual messages on the company network to make a compliance officer choke. I didn't act on it yet. I needed timing. Their Bali trip was the final test. If he hesitated, came clean, even lied better, I might be adjusted my course. But the night before their flight, he kissed me on the cheek, told me not to overthink things while he was away, and said he'd bring back something nice from duty-free. He packed the silver luggage I bought him for our anniversary. She brought the beach tote I once gave her as a gift when I thought she was just one of his team. I let them go, and then I began scheduling the all-staff meeting for the Monday after their return. I instructed HR to prep the termination packages. I had security cameras reviewed. I even notified reception to expect 2 visitors whose keycards would stop working after 10 a.m. The beauty of it all. He still believed he was ascending. He thought he was finally being recognized. He had no idea I was the one who had recognized everything. The conference room was full, department heads, team leads, HR, finance. Everyone had assumed this was a quarterly update on the merger. The energy buzzed with tension, especially from those who knew the whispers that change was coming, but no one knew how deep it would cut. He walked in 5 minutes late, radiating smug charm in his navy blazer and tan loafers, the kind of swagger men wear when they believe the universe is aligning in their favor. She followed close behind, adjusting her blouse, acting self-important with her tablet and fake composure. They took seats near the head of the table, unaware that that chair, my chair, was already claimed. I stepped in. Silence rippled through the room like a snapped wire. Even those who didn't know me sensed the shift. He blinked. "What's going on?" he asked, almost laughing. I smiled. "Please stay seated. This won't take long." HR handed them 2 sealed envelopes. One each. Thick with details. "Effective immediately," I said, turning to the rest of the room. "These 2 are no longer employed by this company. Grounds: ethical violations, misappropriation of company resources, and breach of conduct policy." He stood up, voice shaky now. "You don't have the authority to do this." "I do," I said, laying down the final contract. "As majority shareholder and acting CEO, I do." She opened her envelope, lips trembling. This can't be real. You can't just erase us." I looked directly at her. "You erased yourselves the moment you signed for the Bali suite with the corporate Amex. Room 804. Champagne upgrades. Private car. All charged to marketing." He tried to lunge for the paperwork on the table, but 2 security guards had already stepped forward. Calmly. Respectfully. They weren't here for violence, they were here for order. My order. "But this is insane," he hissed. "You've been spying on me." "No," I said. "I've been paying attention." He looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to defend him. But the room was still. Some looked down. Others looked right at him, unimpressed. One woman in finance even smirked. 15 years, I said quietly, of loyalty, silence, support. I built you. And when you thought I was no longer useful, you tore it all apart for this. I turned to the rest of the room. Let this be clear, no one is untouchable. No title, no charm, no secrets protect you from the consequences of your actions. I gathered my notes and walked out. The meeting was over. The rain had changed. And this time, the woman in the room, the one they underestimated, had all the power. The fallout was fast. And glorious. By Wednesday, industry news had caught wind of the quiet restructuring at our firm. By Friday, 2 local outlets ran stories, merger leads to firing of senior exec amid scandal. His name wasn't redacted, but I didn't need headlines for closure. What I needed, what I'd earned, was the stillness that followed. The emails from former colleagues congratulating me. The quiet handshakes from department leads who finally saw who had been behind the scenes all along. The way people started calling me Ms. Lee, again, not his wife. He tried to fight back, of course. Threatened legal action. I had the receipts. He tried to manipulate mutual friends. They had already heard both sides, and they chose silence. I received one final email from him, a month later. "I know I hurt you. But you didn't have to ruin me." I didn't reply. He wasn't ruined. He was revealed. I, on the other hand, was reborn. I reclaimed my name in the industry, not by shouting, but by executing flawlessly. Within a year, our company had doubled in valuation. I launched an internal mentorship program for women returning to the workforce after caregiving gaps. I shared my story, not all the sordid details, but the truth of it, that being underestimated is the most powerful weapon a woman can wield, if she's patient. As she moved cities. Last I heard, she'd applied for a job with one of our competitors. They called me for a reference. I said only this: she has potential, but lacks discernment. Poised. Precise. Enough. And that silver luggage he packed for Bali. I donated it to a women's shelter. Someone else can pack it now, with dignity, with hope, with the promise of a future that isn't built on betrayal. Because this chapter of my life, the one written with pain, patience, and purpose, is over. And the next. I'm writing that one for me.